and gentlemen, we're off to a little bit of a rough start, but I want to call this meeting officially to order. It is March 29th at 10:34 a.m., and I apologize for this technical delay. Miss Taylor, good morning to you. Could you please call the roll?
Certainly, Chair Cohen. Chair Cohen.
Present.
Vice Chair Schaefer. Member Gaines.
Present.
Member Vasquez.
Present.
Deputy Controller Stowers.
Present.
A quorum is present, Chair Cohen.
All right. Thank you very much. Everyone, if you are physically able to rise and say the Pledge of Allegiance, please join me in placing your right hand over your heart and saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good morning. Okay. Madam, Ms. Taylor, what's the first item?
Our first item of business would be our announcement for our teleconference participation. Good morning, and thank you for joining today's Board of Equalization meeting via teleconference. Throughout the duration of today's meeting, you will primarily be in a listen-only mode. As you may know from our public agenda notice and our website, we have requested that individuals who wish to make a public comment fill out the public comment submission form found on our additional information webpage in advance of today's meeting, or alternatively, participate in today's meeting by providing your public comment live. After the presentation of an item has concluded, we will begin by identifying any public comment requests that have been received by our board proceeding staff, with the AT&T operator providing directions for you to identify yourself. After all known public commenters have been called, the operator will also provide public comment instructions to the individuals participating via teleconference. Accordingly, if you intend to make a public comment today, we recommend dialing into the meeting on the teleconference line, as the audio broadcast on our website experiences a 1 to 3 minute delay. When giving a public comment, please limit your remarks to 3 minutes. We ask that everyone who is not intending to make a public comment please mute their line or minimize background noise. If there are technical difficulties when we are in the public comment portion of our meeting, we will do our best to read submitted comments into the record at appropriate times. Thank you for your patience and understanding.
Thank you very much, Ms. Taylor, for reading the opening remarks. And ladies and gentlemen, before we get started with our published agenda, I'd like to take a moment and just to recognize March as being Women's History Month. We are closing it out, but I want to let you know that I take great pleasure and a personal privilege as chair of the board to recognize the accomplishment of women from the past who have fought for equality, and the women of today who continue to break ceilings and lead us into a more just future. This month, the month of March, is a time to reflect on the diverse voices that have shaped our history. And not many people know this, but Women's History Month began right here in California as a local celebration in Santa Rosa. The Sonoma County Commission on the Status of Women planned and initiated a Women's History Week, a celebration in 1978. And the organizers selected the week of March 8th to correspond with International Women's Day. The movement spread across the country as other communities initiated their own Women's History Week celebrations the following year. And so this movement actually culminated in 1987 when Congress officially designated March as Women's History Month. And since then, women from California have continued to trailblaze, as is evident with the fact of our first female vice president hailing from our great state. In 2022, the National Women's History theme is providing healing and promoting hope. So I just wanted to open up this month's meeting, although scheduled at the end of Women's History. Just wanted to uplift the many women that are doing a great job being trailblazers, some of them seen, most of them unseen. So at this time, we just acknowledge the service of women to our families, to our communities, to our work environments. And with that, I'll see if there's any other Oh, I see Mr. Vasquez has his hand up. Mr. Vasquez, I'll turn the mic over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And yes, I'm glad you opened up with a little bit of the history of this month. And I just wanted to also share a few thoughts on that. And one, before I get into some of the, at least folks that are being recognized, or women that are being recognized here in the LA County, I just wanted to give a little shout out to a lot of the women that are providing care during this pandemic, home care workers. And I've experienced it firsthand with my mother-in-law, who's basically bedridden now. And if it wasn't for, we've had actually several women over the last couple of years that have put out so much energy and time and love for her. And I just read an article recently, which I thought was a little bit appalling. I didn't realize that many of these women, in many cases, that are caring for their patients, in many cases end up passing away before their patients, which is kind of ironic. You know, here they are providing a service and they're not really taking it in many cases because they're working long hours, and the stress apparently in that occupation in many cases takes their own lives. So I just wanted to give a shout out to these folks, and then give a plug to a couple of things that are happening here in LA County that I wasn't aware of. One of them is the Betty Mason Memorial Park in Los Angeles honors Bridget Betty Mason, a woman born into slavery in 1818 who moved into California with a household that owned her. And because California was a free non-slave state, Mason fought hard for freedom in the court and won, and she became a property owner, a nurse, a midwife, and even a philanthropist at the end of the day. The park features her history and her life, so if you happen to be in the area, stop in and take a look at it. They did a real nice job with it. The other one that's at the Natural History Museum in downtown LA as well is featuring, it's called Becoming Jane, the Evolution of Dr. Jane Goodall. It's a hands-on multimedia exhibit celebrating the extraordinary life and work of this conservationist and ethologicist person, Dr. Jane Goodall, and families can explore the life-size replica of Dr. Goodall's research tent here with holograms, and also view some of the artifacts and photos and much, much more. And then the last one, and I believe this exhibit started up in the Bay Area, but now it's here in LA as well, is the Frida Kahlo art exhibit titled Immersive Frida in Hollywood. Allows families to experience the 500,000 cubic feet of art by Frida Kahlo. She's celebrated for her bold, vibrant colors and for her attention to the Mexican indigenous culture. She suffered from polio as a child and nearly died in a bus accident as a teenager and focused heavily on paintings recovering from her injuries. And it turns out over her lifespan, she had over 30 operations and created over 200 paintings, sketches, and drawings about her suffrage and experience. So those, and actually there's another one I forgot too, is the Pacific Design Center in West Hollywood as a brightly colored building. It's featured key architects involved with projects, Norma Merrick, and I'm probably going to butcher her last name. I think it's Skaleric, who was the first Black woman licensed as an architect in California. She designed the United States Embassy in Tokyo, Japan in 1976, and the Terminal 1 station at the Los Angeles International Airport in 1984. She was the first Black woman to own her own architectural practice in California. She is called the Rosa Parks of architecture. These are just a few extraordinary contributions of women that have made in our state, and it's been wonderful to learn about them and celebrate their history. Thank you, Madam Chair, for this opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you for reading that history. Mr. Gaines, I see your hand.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to take a moment, if I could, with regard to Women's History Month, and thank you for all your comments. I'm learning a lot this morning. But I did want to highlight my mother, Winnie Gaines, who was called by God to go to seminary. And so when I was in high school, she commuted down to the Church Divinity School of the Pacific, CDSP, in Berkeley, and got her degree in divinity. And we were raised in the Episcopal Church, so she was active at Trinity Cathedral Church here in Sacramento, and became a deacon, which was unusual at the time because this was in the 70s and early 80s. And in fact, it took her a while to get ordained within the church because you had to get permission from the bishop. And so there was a lot of, in a sense, political wrangling. Politics is in everything, isn't it? And so at the time, it took her a couple years before she could get ordained, and became even more active at Trinity Cathedral, and really focused her ministry on the sick and the dying, and spent a lot of time in the hospital, similar to what Member Vasquez was describing, basically being with families and those who were sick, either right before death or when the death occurred or right afterwards. And so I'm so proud of her in terms of what she was able to overcome. I think she was the first ordained Episcopal priest in Northern California at the time. And now it's much more common, and so nice to see the advantages that a woman can provide with the nature of a woman versus the nature of a man when it comes to a position of leadership within the church. So just want to highlight her and celebrate women and all the great accomplishments that they have made, outside the house, but also in the home too, in terms of raising our children. I think of my wife and what she's done, raising our 6 children, and I call her the human engineer. So we're blessed in multiple fronts, but the main point is that women have the opportunity to do as they wish with their lives. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that personal history. Senator Gaines, I always enjoy hearing and learning a little bit more about you and hearing about your mother and her contributions. Folks, what I'd like to do is just to take a moment and go through a little bit of women's history as it relates to the Board of Equalization. And I'd like to thank the women that have served. Now there's a few familiar names in this list, so I think it's important for us to reflect on the following. Prior to 2002, only one woman was elected to the California Board of Equalization in her own right as a board member. Her name was Orpha Jean Shantz, and that happened in 1934. After Ms. Shantz, Iris Stanke was appointed in 1976, and in 1995, Controller Kathleen Connell was elected state controller and served on the board in that role. Since 2002, 7 women, including State Controller Betty Yee and myself, have been elected to serve on the Board of Equalization. 4 women have served the Board of Equalization as executive director. Cindy Rambo was the first in 1988. She served from 1988 to 1991. Then our very own Christine Kazad from 2010 to 2012, followed by Cynthia Bridges from 2012 to 2016, and our current executive director, Brenda Fleming, from 2019 until present. So I'm hoping that we'll also make history again this month with the historic confirmation of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, who will be the first African American woman to serve on the United States Supreme Court. So all of these facts, all of these women reflect progress that is being made throughout our country. But needless to say, we have a very long way to go when you think about the history of the state of California being around for about 147 years, and we have had 4 executive directors of the Board of Equalization. So there's much work that needs to be done, but we do celebrate and we uplift those women that have made historic strides, and not only remembering that women and their contributions today, this month, but every day. And let's just take a moment to renew our commitment to advancing equity so that everyone can realize their dreams and their full potential. I know you guys the gentlemen on this call are fathers of daughters, and I've done a lot to support your daughters in their own careers. And then we as women, Yvette and I, are working very hard to strive to continue to push and uplift and bring younger women behind us into the life of public service. So it's with a great sense of optimism and hope about the promising future of women that I invite my colleagues to celebrate Women's History Month. So with that, I see no other names. Let's go ahead and dive into our first item on the agenda. Ms. Taylor, please call the item.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. Our first order of business will be item AA1, presentation on state assessee industry trends. Presentation on trends impacting state assessee valuations in the following industries: electric generation, gas and electric, pipeline, railroads, local telephone, wireless, and inter-exchange telecommunications. This item will be presented by Mr. McCool, Ms. Cruz, Mr. Tran, and Ms. Williams.
Good morning, Chair Cohen and honorable members of the board. My name is Jack McCool, Chief of the State Assessed Properties Division.
Good morning, Jack. Before you hold on, before you roll it out, I love the enthusiasm, Mr. McCool. But I just kind of want to set the frame and just kind of frame it up with my colleagues, just so they know like what we're doing and why we're doing it. So we have a special presentation by Mr. McCool, who's the chief of our State Assessed Property Tax Division. At our last board meeting, we had a presentation on unitary value setting for state assessees. And I think it's important for us to remind ourselves why we're doing what we do and how we do what we do. So today's presentation is a follow-up presentation on just industry trends. It's important for us, as well as the members of the public, to understand the emerging issues facing, or the emergency issues affecting the evaluation of state assessees, should they be reviewed on a periodic basis. So today's just an opportunity for public review. It's an informational. And so with that, I want to introduce the issue, one caution for my fellow board members. And this caution is the same one that I stated at our last board meeting, that this is just a special presentation, high-level policy discussion, and we cannot discuss individual companies. So if we were to do so, we would be in violation of taxpayers' confidentiality and maintain our own work our own work in adopting values for companies at our meeting that is to come in May. So we ask that questions are welcomed, but please limit them to just policy issues only, without any direct reference from some of the state employees that may be at the top of your mind. So with that introduction, Mr. McCool, take it away. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. Good morning, Chair Cohen and honorable members of the board. My name is Jack McCool, Chief of the State Assessed Properties Division. I am joined today by 3 members of the SAPD staff, and collectively we will be making a presentation on industry trends affecting values for state assessees. I will begin today's presentation with a short overview. I will then be followed by Mr. Huy Tran, Supervising Property Appraiser, who will be presenting industry trends for the electric generation and gas and electric industries. Ms. Tara Williams, also a Supervising Property Appraiser, will then present industry trends for the pipeline and railroad industries. Ms. Michelle Cruz is the manager of the Unitary Valuation and Auditing section, and she will present the industry trends for our 3 telecommunications industries. Finally, I will wrap up the presentation with a short summary, and all 4 members of our team will then be available to answer any questions that you may have. So with that, let us begin. And other team members can drop off camera. Thank you. And here we go. The objective of today's presentation is to provide the board with an update on some of the trends affecting value for each of the 7 industry groups. It is important to note that SAPD's mission is to determine the current market value of each assessee's taxable property, which is not the same as valuing the assessee's entire business. Therefore, our attention in today's presentation is focused on issues affecting property tax values. As SAPD's role is limited to property tax valuation, it is difficult for our staff to comment on policy or regulatory action as we have no role in those arenas. SAPD staff monitor industry trends in a variety of ways. First and foremost is through collaboration with state assessees. Our staff communicates frequently with state assessee representatives throughout the year. We typically meet annually with most of the larger assessees prior to the valuation season, and we also have informal communications throughout the year. It is during these discussions that assessees typically will raise issues that they feel are important to their valuations. These meetings give our staff the opportunity to ask questions about such issues and to get a better understanding of how certain issues may have an impact on values. SAPD staff also monitor industry trends by reading trade magazines, appraisal newsletters, and other industry publications. Some of these publications may not have a direct link to appraisal issues, but they do help inform our staff of market conditions for the various industries. Regulatory agencies also provide vital insight into trends affecting our regulated utilities. The California Public Utilities Commission, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and the Federal Surface Transportation Board all produce various regulatory documents that contain important information that our staff monitors closely. Our staff also engages with counterparts in other states to stay informed on important appraisal issues. Our membership in WSATA, the Western State Association of Tax Administrators, for example, provides our staff with the opportunity to discuss issues of importance with unitary appraisers in other Western states. As we go through each of the industry groups today, it is important to note that not all industry trends have a direct effect on value. Certain trends or issues may change market conditions or provide an indication of an industry's general economic direction, but some trends may not have a direct effect on a specific assessee's value of taxable property. So as our team highlights some of the trends we are monitoring, please keep in mind that the trends we will be discussing today are high-level trends meant to give the board more context for each industry leading up to this year's unitary value setting. I will note that staff has put together most of today's material prior to many of our assessee meetings for the 2022 value season and before most of the annual property statements were received this year. So there may be other issues that arise during this appraisal season that are not reflected in today's presentation. As today's presenters review industry trends, they will also provide a quick review of the value indicators used by each industry. I know that we reviewed the value indicators at the special presentation last month, but to help put industry trends in context, we will go through each industry's value indicators briefly today as well. As we start going through our industries, I will close the first part of this presentation by stating that it's not always easy to quantify a particular trend's impact on the taxable value of an assessee's property. That is one of the challenges of today's presentation. We do hope to help inform the board of issues each of the industries are operating in, but we must note that the impacts from some of these challenges are not always easy to either identify or to quantify. With that, Mr. Tran will begin our review of the industry trends.
I would like to begin with the number of assessees in the electric generation industry. The electric generation industry consists of 41 state assessees, which comprises 12% of the total number of state assessees, which you can see at the top right portion of the pie chart highlighted in blue. The total 2021 assessed value for the electric generation industry was $7.5 billion, which comprises 6.1% of the overall state assessed value, which you can see at the bottom right portion of the pie chart highlighted in blue. The primary value indicators typically used for newer facilities in the electric generation industry is the replacement cost, less depreciation, and capitalized earning ability, or the CEA, value indicators. For newer facilities, these indicators are typically given equal reliance. Replacement cost less depreciation reflects the replacement cost of current technology, while the CEA is considered reliable due to the reduced volatility and income projections for newer facilities. When it comes to older facilities, the specific reliance on replacement cost less depreciation and the CEA value indicators varies depending on predictability and reliability of future income streams. Our staff must consider whether the facility has a long-term contract, a short-term contract, or in some cases, no contract at all. If the state assessed facility was recently sold, the sales indicator is also given some consideration. Our staff will attempt to obtain details of a sales agreement that pertains to the portion of the sales price that was allocated to the physical assets. To summarize, it is important to consider the age of the facility and the length of the contract when determining the use of these value indicators for this industry. Among the trends affecting the electric generation industry is rise in natural gas prices. Natural gas is the largest fuel source for the electricity generated in California. Natural gas prices for electric power generations were historically low in 2020, but have risen quite sharply in 2021. The impact of rising natural gas prices will likely result in higher operating costs for these facilities, which will generally result in decreased assessed values. Another trend that will have an impact on the electric generation industry is the closure of the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant. This power plant is located on California's central coast and is scheduled to shut down on November 2nd of 2024 when PG&E's license to operate expires. This plant produces more than 8% of the state's energy portfolio and has been the sole operational nuclear power plant facility in California. The impact that this closure of this facility will have on the electric generation industry is that it will likely create a demand for more runtime for state-assessed power plants to make up for the loss in available megawatts generated by this facility due to its closure. Renewable energy is another trend affecting the electric generation industry, and the impact that it will have really comes down to the future energy policies pursued by California lawmakers. As the presence of renewable energy increases, it will likely cause state-assessed power plants to gradually run less over time, potentially resulting in decreased assessed values at a faster rate than under normal circumstances. However, in the short term, there should be less of an impact until there are sufficient renewable energy resources put in place. Renewable energy has its limitations and, for the near term, may not be able to meet all of California's energy needs. Because the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow, there will be a need for gas-fired power plants for the near term, despite the advances of renewable energy. Regulations imposed on once-through cooling facilities is another trend affecting the electric generation industry. Once-through cooling facilities are located on California's coast and uses ocean water as a cooling source for the power plants. The California State Water Resources Board, or the State Water Board, has determined that these facilities are harmful to the marine life in the ocean. So they've adopted a policy on the use of ocean water for power plant cooling that became effective on October 1st of 2010. The policy sets statutory compliance dates for these facilities that range from December 31st of 2017 to December 31st of 2020 to mitigate or close as stipulated by the State Water Board and California Energy Commission. As of the 2022 lien date, the board assesses a total of 5 once-through cooling facilities, which accounts for about 6% of the overall electric generation industry value. The State Water Board amended the once-through cooling policy on November 30th of 2020, which extended the compliance dates for 4 of the state-assessed facilities from December 31st of 2020 to December 31st of 2023. And the 5th facility has implemented control technology, operational, and mechanical upgrades, and therefore will comply with the policy without shutting down operations. The statutory compliance dates were extended in order to provide stability and reliability to the energy grid while renewables are still being built out and are able to come online to replace the power generated from these once-through cooling facilities. Once these renewables come online and the once-through cooling facilities go offline, this should result in a decrease of about 6% to the overall electric generation industry value. Moving on to the gas and electric industry. The gas and electric industry consists of 33 state assessees, which comprises 9.5% of the total number of state assessees, which you can see at the top right portion of the pie chart highlighted in blue. The total 2021 assessed value for the gas and electric industry was $89.4 billion, which comprises 72.6% of the overall state assessed value, which you can see on the left portion of the pie chart highlighted in blue. The primary value indicators typically used for investor-owned utilities in the gas and electric industry is the historical cost less depreciation, or the HCLD value indicator. The capitalized earning ability is also typically given some consideration for these type of assessees. For electric cooperatives and gas transmission, the primary indicator is HCLD as regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. These companies are considered to be closely regulated. SAPD will also consider the CEA value indicator for companies showing a reliable income stream. The gas storage companies we assess are not subject to traditional rate making process, so the HCLD indicator is generally not used. Instead, the reproduction cost, less depreciation, and the CEA are typically both considered. Among the trends affecting the gas and electric industry is the significant growth in capital expenditures that investor-owned utilities are currently experiencing. The state of California set goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 40% from 1990 levels by 2030 and 80% from the same baseline by 2050. Additionally, the state is aiming to be carbon neutral by 2045. State and local air quality plans call for substantial improvements. The CPUC and CEC has also jointly implemented California's Renewable Portfolio Standard Program, which requires all electric load serving entities to procure 60% of its electricity portfolio from eligible renewable energy resources by 2030. As a result, state-assessed investor-owned utilities are currently experiencing significant growth in actual and planned capital expenditures to replace and expand their distribution and transmission infrastructure, and to construct new assets and replace older assets. The impact this growth is having on the gas and electric industry is resulting in increased assessed values. Another trend that continues to have an impact on the gas and electric industry is the wildfire climate change issue. This is an evolving issue that SAPD is continuing to monitor. SAPD continues to have ongoing discussions with investor-owned utilities on this issue. SAPD has also allowed adjustments to account for the wildfire climate change issue based on regulatory decisions made by the CPUC and Assembly Bill 1054. These adjustments result in a reduction to the utility's assessed value.
Currently, there are 24 pipeline assessees, which represents 7.4% of the total number of state assessees, as you can see in the pie chart highlighted in blue. The 24 pipeline assessees represent 0.9%, or just over $1 billion of the total value assessed by the board. The primary indicators for common carrier pipelines are the reproduction cost less depreciation, or Repro CLD, historical cost less depreciation, HCLD, both cost approaches, and the capitalized earning ability, CEA, which is an income approach. The use of Repro CLD and CEA is based on assessee-specific factors. Non-regulated natural gas transmission pipelines are typically valued using reproduction cost less depreciation, Repro CLD, a cost approach. Non-common carrier pipelines are also valued primarily using the reproduction cost less depreciation, Repro CLD indicator. There are several trends that may affect the pipeline industry, one of which is the COVID-19 impact on the oil and natural gas industries. There was a decrease in value across the board for both industries in 2021. There was also a decrease in the cost of oil for 2020 as demand bottomed out during the pandemic and the price per barrel of crude oil dropped worldwide. This led to a decrease in the CEA value indicator, which we typically only consider for our largest pipelines. Another trend the pipeline industry is facing is the move away from fossil fuels to cleaner electric alternatives. This could potentially impact both the oil and natural gas industries by decreasing end user demand. For example, California's potential 2035 ban on sales of new internal combustion engine or gas-powered vehicles will likely contribute to the decrease in demand for oil. If end user consumption decreases, this likely will result in decreased values for the pipeline companies. However, there are a lot of questions to this issue that we will continue to monitor in the coming years. While there is a general trend to move away from fossil fuels, in the short term, we are seeing an increase in demand, which is leading to older pipelines being repaired and or extended. We will, of course, continue to monitor those developments very closely. There are currently 31 railroad assessees, which represent 10.6% of the total number of state assessees, as seen and highlighted in blue on the pie chart. The 31 railroad assessees represents 3.8% or approximately $4.5 billion of the total value assessed by the board, as you can see in the pie chart highlighted in blue. For the railroad industry, the CEA value indicators are considered most appropriate. Repro CLD is used only sparingly in the railroad industry due to the old age of many of the assets and the difficulty estimating depreciation. For the large Class 1 railroads, staff relies mostly on the perpetual life CEA using the most recent year's income. The perpetual life CEA is also the primary value indicator for most of the short line railroads. However, in some instances, the salvage indicator is used. This indicator would be calculated when the highest and best use of the property would be to disassemble and sell the component parts of the railroad rather than continue it as a going concern. There are several trends that may affect the railroad industry, one of which is the 4R Act. The 4R Act lowers railroad values. The Act imposes restrictions on state and local taxation of railroads by assessing rail transportation property at the same percentage of market value as all other commercial and industrial property in California, thereby reducing rail transportation appraised values by a certain ratio, which is calculated each year. The 4R Act was adopted to protect railroads from discriminatory taxation. In recent years, the ratio has been steadily decreasing. Another trend in Another trend, is the COVID-19 impact on excursion/passenger railroad companies. For calendar year 2020, excursion/passenger railroad companies experienced a decline due to the decrease in customers and the required social distancing mandates, which reduced the amount of people allowed on trains. As this year's property statements start to come in, our railroad appraisal staff will have a better idea of the potential impact of COVID-19 for 2022. The railroad industry is also facing supply chain constraints, which have slowed some railroads' ability to move freight and cargo in a normal fashion. Railroads are also facing increased operating costs and expenses as a result of theft of freight and cargo, which could potentially increase insurance costs as well as disrupt their normal operations in moving freight. If the cargo and freight theft becomes an ongoing problem, the railroad companies would have to absorb these losses, which would increase expenses. Some of the larger railroad companies have also reported labor shortages as another issue in their ability to maintain normal operations. Another trend that we are monitoring is California wildfires. Each year, we monitor wildfires and work with railroad companies to determine if they have suffered any losses or damages to property as a result of wildfires. Wildfire damage can sometimes result in disruption of operations or increased costs due to replacing damaged property.
The local telephone industry consists of 19 state assessees, which comprises 5.4% of the total number of state assessees, which is located in the bottom right corner of the pie chart in blue. The total 2021 assessed value for the local telephone industry was $6.8 billion, which comprises 5.6% of the overall state assessed value, which is located in the top right corner of the pie chart in blue. The first value indicator used by SAPD for the local telephone industry is historical cost less depreciation, or HCLD for short, which is our traditional landline assessees. This is the historical or original cost of the property minus the accumulated depreciation. It is an important value indicator for closely regulated public utilities. The second value indicator used for our larger local telephone assessees is the replacement cost less depreciation, which is the estimate of the current cost to replace the existing property with a new equivalent. Here, staff use index factors applied to the cost of the property by year and then adjust by a % good factor to calculate the amount of depreciation. The last value indicator used is the income approach, also known as the capitalized earning ability approach. The CEA is a method that converts future anticipated income into present value. Changes in technology have reduced the number of local telephone rate regulated customers, revenue, and workforce. As a result, local telephone assessees have experienced significant declines in their customer base, resulting in excess network capacity and revenue loss since 2015. In addition, the overall wireline business continues to erode due to the impact of competition and technology, such as broadband internet or wireless offerings. As a result of the decline in the wireline business, there has also been a reduction in workforce. These trends have resulted in a general decline in values for assessees in this industry. The wireless industry consists of 25 state assessees, which comprises 7.2% of the total number of state assessees, which is located at the bottom portion of the pie chart in blue. The total 2021 assessed value for the wireless telephone industry was $8.7 billion, which comprises 6.8% of the overall state assessed value, which is located at the center right portion of the pie chart located in blue. The primary value indicator used by SAPD in the wireless industry is the replacement cost less depreciation, which is the estimate of current costs to replace existing property with a new equivalent. Here, staff use index factors applied to the cost of the property by year and adjust by a percent good factor to calculate the amount of depreciation. SAPD will also sometimes consider the income approach value indicator, also known as the CEA approach. The CEA is a method that converts future anticipated income into present value. COVID-19 has increased the number of connected devices due to remote work condition. Faster mobile and fixed wireless connections create more appealing alternatives to wired connections, contributing to the growth of the wireless industry and a shrinking local telephone industry. COVID has also adversely affected the wireless industry financially due to the limited capacity of retail stores, reduced consumer traffic in these locations, and accounts in default. Next, the shutdown of 3G networks for major carriers is projected to be completed in 2022. This could have a major impact if not addressed. Older 3G equipment, such as handheld devices and tablets, must be replaced by users for the device to be functional. 3G was introduced in 2002, but over time, wireless companies have now moved on to 4G and 5G networks. Lastly, 5G is the next generation wireless technology that's expected to change the way people live and work. Companies are racing to have the fastest or largest 5G networks. Countries are also competing to be the first to deploy fully functional nationwide 5G. That's because the benefits of the new technology are expected to fuel transformative new technologies, not just for consumers, but also for businesses, infrastructure, and defense applications. 5G signals run over new radio frequencies, also known as spectrum, which requires additional costs for updating radios and other equipment on cell towers. Carriers are also installing small cell sites to light poles, walls, or towers. The inter-exchange telephone industry consists of 166 state assessees, which comprises 47.9% of total number of state assessees, which is located on the left portion of the pie chart in blue. The total 2021 value for the local exchange industry was $5.2 billion, which comprises 4.2% of the overall state assessed value, which is located on the bottom right corner in blue. The value used by SAPD in the inter-exchange industry is the replacement cost less depreciation, which is the estimate of the current cost to replace existing property with a new equivalent. Staff use index factors applied to the cost of property by year and then adjust by a percent good factor to calculate the amount of depreciation. Fiber optic cables are preferred over electrical cabling when high bandwidth or long distance is required. This type of communication can transmit voice, video, and telemetry through local area networks or across long distances. 4 major factors why optical fiber is used over copper is data rates, distance, installation, and cost. Optical fiber provides more bandwidth than copper, which means fiber can carry more information than copper. There is also high costs associated with fiber buildouts, which is something we see in our assessment. Telcos are constantly monitoring bandwidth and capacity, and they are adapting and adding capacity to optimize their networks to the new traffic patterns, avoid congestion, and prioritize critical connectivity traffic. They are expanding their network to avoid disruption during this critical time. Many service providers also took steps to ease burdens on customers and employees impacted by the crisis and have removed data caps even if they're unable to pay their bills. In the US, more than 700 companies and associations have signed the FCC Chairman's Pledge to keep Americans connected to ensure that Americans do not lose their broadband or telephone connectivity as a result of these exceptional circumstances. During the time of the pandemic, they were ensuring that everyone remains connected while being physically isolated around the country. Telecom companies have stepped up and collaborated in unprecedented ways to help the general population. In the last 4 years, SAPD has seen the decrease in the number of inter-exchange assessees by 12%. This is primarily due to acquisition and mergers of different sizes. When an acquisition or merger occurs, typically a purchase price allocation is performed, which reduces the historical cost of the taxable asset. The benefit to an acquisition or merger is greater customer counts and cost savings due to redundant buildouts.
So members, as we conclude our presentation on industry trends, I hope you have found the material to be helpful and informative. As we wrap up, we wanted to provide an overview of the 2 pie charts that we have been referencing throughout today's presentation. On the left, you will see each industry as a percentage of the total number of assessees. And on the right, as you can see on the left, the inter-exchange companies represent the largest industry group by far in terms of the total number of assessees. However, as you can see on the right pie chart, the pie chart on the right-hand side, the gas and electric industry comprises the largest industry in terms of assessed value by far. So just to give you a picture, a comparison of the charts we've been referring to throughout the presentation today. Each color on the left is matched by the color on the right. So as you can see, while inter-exchange is about half of the RSSEs, they represent a small number of the overall assessed value. And gas and electric has a reasonably sized pie chart on the left as far as number of assessees, but they do comprise by far the largest assessee industry group in terms of assessed value. This concludes our presentation on industry trends affecting values of state assessees. Members, we are happy to answer any questions you may have at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question about the electric generation companies.
Mm-hmm.
We've all been aware of the impact of the climate change and wildfires on the operations of electric generation companies. And my question is whether these environmental issues will have a short or long-term impact on the income of these companies that can or should be reflected in the property values of these state assessees.
So is your question, I'm sorry, what was the first part of your question? Was it related to just
Yeah, so the first part of the question is that we know the impact of climate change. We know the impact of wildfires on the operations of the electric generation companies. I just wanted to know whether these environmental issues will have a short-term effect or maybe a long-term effect on the income of these companies.
I think, obviously it's something that can vary differently for specific assessees. Broadly speaking, the issue of just taking climate change by itself, the short-term impacts are as there's a move from fossil fuel generated electricity to renewable energy. Currently, there isn't enough renewable energy. Therefore, electric generation, our power plants, are in high demand still. And I think that was reflected in the presentation that we mentioned, the ones through cooling plants. Their life, the allowable life to operate was extended once, and it potentially could be extended again. As time goes on and more of the utilities operate with more and more renewable energy, our electric generation facilities, the power plants, are likely to not be in as high a demand. So if they're not able to have contracts with the utilities to provide power, then that should in turn reduce their revenue. When it comes to the utilities themselves, I think that would be a different story. I think the utilities, the gas and electric utilities, are more impacted by wildfires on an ongoing basis. I don't believe we've really seen the issue with the individual electric generation facilities yet when it comes to the wildfire issue. And I think generally speaking, because of all the requirements for renewable energy, as well as the requirements imposed on the utilities for hardening of assets in response to wildfires, those two general trends are fueling the giant capital expenditures that they're making each and every year in the last few years. And how long that continues is something we'll be monitoring very closely.
Okay, so I have another question. It's about landline, the landline and telephone companies. So here are just a series of facts that we're aware of. The transition from landlines to cell phones is a very real one. In 2020, only 36% of homes in the United States had a landline. This compares with 97% of homes that had landlines in 2004. In 2020, 63% of homes relied only on cell phones, and this compares to just 3% in 2004. So as you can see, there's been, I'm sure it's reflected in your own family, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so my question is, given the seismic change in the way traditional landlines are used, are there any implications for the valuation of companies that have provided traditional landline services?
Michelle, did you want to answer that one?
I'm sorry, Chairwoman, can you repeat the last portion of your question?
Yeah, no problem. So there's been a change with how people communicate, right? We're shifting away from landlines and we're going to cell phones. And so I wanted to know if there's any implications in the valuation of the company. Is the company still valuable? Is it still profitable? And I'm looking to figure out if the implications for the valuation of the companies that have provided traditional landline services. Are you seeing a trend? Are they moving away from landline services and moving back to online as they build out their 5G network? I'm just looking for some of your analysis and the trends that you're seeing for telephone companies.
Okay, so let me see if I can answer this carefully. Our larger companies have multiple entities, and so some of the equipment have crossovers between the traditional landline and their wireless equipment. And also, in certain areas of California, they are in what's called our rural areas. So they're required to be in those areas. So even as it decreases, it's decreasing very slowly, but I still believe landlines will be around because it's not cost effective for wireless technology to be in rural areas. So
I'm sorry, so that last part, it's not cost effective for wireless companies to be in rural areas.
For build out.
For what reason?
So right now, because obviously they started years and years ago, they have copper fiber or copper cables running out in rural communities. So for them to redo those lines to fiber to be more, to have faster data and faster service is just not feasible.
It's just not what? Feasible?
Feasible, yes. So
Okay.
they are also looking into, which I haven't had a chance this season to follow up at one point. You may have been on the board a few years ago when they talked about fixed wireless, which was a system which they were trying to use wireless equipment along with wireline equipment so that they could put cell towers possibly in rural areas. So that is also in the works with the FCC. I know they were trying to get approval on it, and I just don't know where it's at as of today.
Thank you very much. Okay, we've got 3 hands up. We'll go with Mr. Schaefer, Mr. Gaines, Mr. Vasquez. Mr. Schaefer, go ahead.
All right, thank you. Chair Cohen, I appreciated the statistics you gave us on telecommunications. It wasn't too many years ago that I couldn't live without a fax number, and I had to have a separate telephone answering machine, but that's ancient history now. I have a couple of questions about railroads. Mr. McCool, I'd like to ask you, you said something about amount of people allowed on trains. Is that something really in effect? We're not talking about intercity travel where they always have standing people. We're talking on non-private railroad cars, like, you know, the things we think of as railroads. But I would think that they may say they have a limit so that the value of their property is lowered, when in fact, I think they, I don't know that they have a limit. I've never been on a train that everybody didn't have a seat, where the people, you know, would have to stand. Is there a problem that requires limitation of number of people allowed on trains, or is that just something dreamed up to affect the valuations?
Thank you for the question, Vice Chair Schaefer. So this particular point in our presentation was referring to our passenger excursion train. So most of our state assessed railroads are freight operators, but we do have a handful of what you might refer to as an excursion railroad. So they have, you know, rides through the countryside. We have a wine train operator, that sort of thing. So what we were specifically referring to was impacts those excursion railroads felt last year due to government imposed COVID-19 restrictions. So there was actually a period where they couldn't operate, and then when they were allowed to operate again, they had to operate with reduced capacity. So that created a situation that we felt was essentially economic obsolescence. And we made some adjustments last year for the excursion railroads to account for that. So those adjustments would have, in fact, reduced the value of those excursion railroads last year. So the property tax liability would have been lower. It's a little bit early now for me. I haven't seen the data yet for this current assessment year. So we'll have a better idea in the next month or so whether those same impacts were felt by excursion railroads for this particular lien date.
How old do our railroads get to be? Do we have any railroads that are, say, from World War I era that would make them 100 years old? You know, the trains today don't look like the ones in old movies.
No, that's for sure. I think railroads are just like every other industry. There's new technology. The locomotives are powered in different ways than they used to be. There are quite a few old trains still out there. So whether, I know there's museums and collectors and that type of thing, but I believe some of the locomotives still operating in businesses in California are quite old.
We know where old airplanes go to die. As you drive in the Arizona desert, you see 100 airplanes in a field that'll be there forever. What happens to old trains? Do they cut them up and bury them, or do they have them here and there isolated in museums? I would think there'd be enough to have like the airlines do, a place that people might want to come see old trains.
There are a lot of train fans out there, and I know that there are a few hobby clubs that exist that will take on some old trains that no longer have value for our operating railroads. I think that some locomotives are scrapped at some point, but I do think there's quite a few that have ended up in museums. So we don't really see the railroad graveyards that you might be referring to with the airplane industry, but there's plenty of railroad museums across this country displaying some of those older locomotives.
Are we taxing only the trains that are actually rolling then?
So there's a little bit of a distinction. So when it comes to the state assessed railroads, if they own or use the property, then it would be potentially taxable. So I think it's conceivable that we would probably have non-operating railroads that are owned by state assessees. I would imagine that the value of those railroads, of those trains specifically, would be quite low. They're not operating. There's probably some sort of a mechanical problem, or they may just be older technology. So if we're strictly speaking about state assessed railroads, those would have very, very little value.
Yeah, any that are not functioning, I would want us to realize that there's very little value there.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, want to hear from Mr. Gaines.
Great, thank you. I want to thank you for the presentations. They're very helpful, and I just had a couple of questions on valuation and how you make these transitions when, in particular, in the wireless arena, we've got the 3G networks, and we're starting to upgrade to the 5G. And I'm trying to figure out, how does that impact the revenue that comes into the state as a result of a generational change in technology? And is there a period of time where you have depreciated 3G network, and so you see a decline in revenue that then is supplemented by newer technology that increases revenue? What does that look like in terms of through a transition?
So for our property tax assessments for the telecommunications industry, the primary valuation indicators are actually the cost approach. So just specifically referring to like the revenue angle isn't necessarily as much of a direct impact on telecommunication values. However, to your point about 3G networks operating at the same time as a 5G build out, there are obviously duplicative costs operating different or parallel networks. So part of the reason for no longer operating a 3G network is to no longer have those costs and to no longer have that property on the books. So so from just a property tax state assessed standpoint, the build out of the newer networks will be that same appraisal thought, is replacing older, more depreciated property with newer, less depreciated property, which generally speaking will result in an increase in the assessed value.
Right, okay. And would that be the same for wildfire damage? So if you look at a railroad and let's say some of the ties catch fire.
Right. That's exactly right. So as those fires damage railroad property, for example, or trestle is damaged, it could potentially affect the railroads in different ways. Some of the income generating railroads, if there's a particular route, I'm just making an example, somewhere in a canyon or a mountain, and they can no longer get through that area due to either a wildfire or damage to their line, then they would have to reroute that freight through a different set of tracks, which could potentially increase operating costs, delay freight from delivery, change the rates they're able to charge. So for the income generating railroads, it could potentially have a negative impact on their revenue, which could potentially lower the value. Just looking at it from some of the other railroads that we have that aren't necessarily income positive, and we may use a cost approach, that's the same idea as the older railroad property that was damaged would be replaced by something that's newer and less depreciated, which actually could increase the assessed value. So it would just depend on the specific operator and the specific circumstances.
Okay, all right, great. And can you help me with this Diablo Canyon
Okay.
facility? It's going to get shut down in a couple of years, and I'm just trying to figure out how that works. You know, because it's going to get decommissioned, right? And so, does the value go down to zero?
So Diablo Canyon is owned and operated by PG&E. So we have worked very closely with PG&E to develop a valuation model to draw down the value of the facility as it reaches its end date. So you know, without getting too technical, you know, there's certain equipment that will have to remain beyond the closure of the facility. So there will be still some property there that will be assessed, but so that, I mean, that's something that we've been working very closely with PG&E as well as San Luis Obispo County for a number of years now. But you know, once the facility ceases generating electricity, it will still have. I'm definitely not an expert in nuclear technology, but I know there will be staff on site, and there will be, you know, things that they need to do to maintain the certain parts of the infrastructure related to the nuclear generation.
Yes. Okay. Okay, and if it gets extended, let's say you know, we're still, because there's been issues with blackouts in the state of California, and there's questions about reliability with regards to renewable energy.
Right.
So from a valuation standpoint, let's say let's say they were going to decommission in 3 years. Now they're looking at a 6-year time frame. How do you handle the valuation if it's kind of a start-stop sort of sequence?
Jack, I want to jump in. We don't
Sure.
assess the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant.
Well, so the Diablo Canyon power plant is assessed as part of PG&E's assessment. It's not assessed as a separate facility as we do in the electric generation industry per se. So for that industry, each facility is a separate assessee essentially. So I think one of the points we were trying to make in the presentation today is, as Diablo Canyon reaches its end date, there's a certain amount of generating capacity that will no longer be available for the state. And I know, you know, more broadly speaking, there's a hope that, you know, renewables will make up that difference. You know, it's certainly not something that our property tax staff can predict whether there will be sufficient renewable capacity to make up the loss of Diablo Canyon's generating capacity. So it's our expectation that our electric generation facilities will be in higher demand once that facility closes down, because there'll just be a need to replace that generating capacity. So I think the overall value trend in relation to Diablo Canyon would actually be a little bit less focused on PG&E's valuation because of, you know, the expanse of their operations overall, and would actually probably have more of a direct impact on some of our electric generation facilities that will just be they'll need to run longer than they would otherwise if Diablo Canyon hadn't closed.
Natural gas?
Well, natural gas.
In terms of solar, or
Yeah, so all of the state assessed utilities are still trying to meet those renewable goals. And moving away from fossil fuels would include having less reliance on natural gas. I personally don't know where the state stands in terms of natural gas as part of the overall generating and how much percent of our electricity is coming from renewables. I just don't know those numbers. But as we mentioned in his presentation, the natural gas is still the primary fuel for our electric generation facilities. So as those facilities continue to operate, they still need that fuel. So I think in the short term, I don't know that we're really expecting our electric generation facilities to start fading away. And a longer trend would be the more of the state's electricity is coming from renewables, then the less operation we'll see from the facilities that we're assessing now.
Right, and then you'll see valuation transition
Correct.
to new energy creation by utilities in different areas, I guess.
Correct.
All right, that's great. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Vasquez, then we'll hear from Yvette Stowers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, thank you, Mr. McCool, for your in-depth presentation, and kudos to all your staff. It was a very informative presentation. I just had a couple of quick questions, and let me take the first one, kind of touch on, I think you kind of hit it a little bit in terms of regarding the 5G network technology and infrastructure. And, such as these towers and equipments, I've read that this industry is projected to grow more than 70% within the next 5 years. And its market size is estimated to reach 80 billion within the same period. Do we have the sufficient resources to handle this growth, i.e. staff, as well as expertise to effectively assess this sector? I was wondering if you have any concerns or projections on those evaluations.
I personally don't have any concerns. I mean, we have thankfully a very capable staff. Just speaking to the wireless staff in particular, we have a lead there that's more than capable. Part of our collaboration with our state assessees is to learn more about this new technology, to have an understanding of what some of the plans are and what we should be expecting to see from their annual property statements in the coming years. So we have very good partners in this arena from the industry side. From a property tax assessment perspective, we have our annual property statement that the assessees are required to file. And that is the basis that we use to determine our assessed values on an annual basis. So from the technical side of 5G and how it works relative to 4 or 3G is a little bit less important for our staff. We certainly try to stay as informed as we can. But at the end of the day, it still comes back to what those numbers reported on the property statement.
So Jack, may I add something?
Absolutely.
Mr. Vasquez, just so you know, we do meet with our very large wireless assessees on a yearly basis in which they provide presentations with lots of information regarding what's going on specifically with their company and within the industry. So we are very well informed in the wireless industry.
And I guess my part of that question was, and it sounds like you both feel pretty comfortable with the staffing levels we have to handle that moving forward, especially as it grows.
Yes, I mean, we currently have some vacancies, and we always have a little bit of a challenge trying to remain fully staffed. As I'm sure all of you are very aware, we experienced a significant number of retirements a few years ago, and we're still working through the transition and succession planning from our staff. We've been very fortunate that we have a tremendous amount of very good, very qualified staff. So from the top end of how our staff is currently structured, I feel very I'm actually quite pleased on the level of expertise that we have. Some of the challenges from a staffing perspective have just been filling some of those vacancies more at the bottom of the pyramid, if we can refer to it that way. So we do have some vacancies that we would like to fill with, for lack of a better term, assistant level appraisers, auditor appraisers, the newer, less experienced group. So we have had some challenges filling some of those vacancies, but from the senior level, we're in a very good position.
Thank you. And then just my last quick question is you mentioned about collaborating with larger state assessees and that you have open communications with them all year long.
Yes.
And has that department received any indication regarding a trend in a specific sector that is worth noting or worth talking about to get ahead of some of these issues that might arise in the near future?
I'm not sure, and I don't know, Michelle, if you have anything you can think of. I mean, I think we've tried very much to incorporate a lot of what we have been hearing with some of our SSC communications and meetings into today's presentation. I think there's always emergent issues that can arise during the appraisal season. So I'm sure we'll still see a few surprises between now and when we convene in May. But we working very closely with our SSC partners is a key part of our operation, and I think it goes a long way on both sides to not only keeping our staff informed, but improving our end product, our assessed valuations.
Thank you.
Mr. Vasquez, are you done?
Yes,
Excellent.
thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm done.
Perfect, no
Thank you.
problem. Okay, Ms. Stowers, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just want to quickly, on behalf of the controller, I would like to just thank Mr. McCall and his team for this outstanding presentation. This is exactly what she envisioned when she asked for it this past May. And on a bonus note, just nice to see your team members, to hear how intelligent and qualified and diverse that they are. So kudos to you, Mr. McCall, and your entire team. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
All right, thank you. Seeing that there are no other hands up, we will continue moving forward. This is an informational item. Let's see if there's any public comment on it. Ms. Taylor?
Thank you. AT&T moderator, please let us know if there is anyone on the line who would like to make a public comment regarding this matter.
And to make a public comment from the phone lines, please press 1 and then 0 at this time. Once again, that's 1-0 for any public comments. And we have no public comments in the queue. Please continue.
Okay, Ms. Taylor, seeing that there's no public comment, could you please call the next item?
Looks like we may have
I'm
a
sorry.
hand with Mr.
I'm sorry.
Gaines.
Wait, hold on. Before you call the next item, Mr. Gaines, is that your hand? Is that a fresh hand up?
Yes, thank you. If I could just one more question.
Yes.
Could Mr. McCool help us with total valuation of assessed value by industry and then revenue?
The revenue component is a little bit trickier because we are not the ones that would apply the property tax rate, and we don't collect the actual tax. I could probably provide an estimate. I wouldn't have. We attempt to calculate an average statewide unitary tax rate each year. I don't have that on the top of my head at the moment.
Okay.
But we could marry that number to our total assessed value to come up with an estimated amount of property tax revenue. I believe, and please don't quote me, I believe when we issued the news release last May reporting the unitary value setting adopted by the board, I believe the news release, I want to say, said 1.99 billion in local revenue generated, I believe was the number.
Okay. All right. That's great. Is that something that you could update us on either later in the day or tomorrow?
Absolutely. You know what? In fact, I will include that on my division report later today.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
And I'm sorry, Member Gaines, you just wanted to know the total assessed value as well as the estimated revenue generated?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect.
Thank you. For state assessed. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, great. Thank you. Mr. McCool, we do want to acknowledge your great presentation today. Thank you. And to the entire team, Cruz, Tran, and Williams, we appreciate your thoughtful contributions to today's presentation. Very informative.
Thank you.
Ms. Taylor, with that, please call the next item.
The next item is F1, Other Tax Program, Non-Appearance Matters, Property Tax Audits. Mr. McCool will
Great,
present 3 items for your consideration, which may be voted on individually or collectively. Contribution disclosure forms are not required for these items. As these matters are a constitutional function, Ms. Stowers is not participating in accordance with Government Code Section 7.9. The audits are A, Northwestern Pacific Railroad Company 0827, B, Telespan Communications LLC 7956, C, Time Warner Cable Information Services California LLC 8063. This matter will be presented by Mr. McCool.
Good morning again, Chair Cohen and honorable members. For the record, Jack McCool, Chief of the State Assessed Properties Division. The State Assessed Properties Division performs routine audits of state assessees under the authority of California Revenue and Taxation Code Section 828 and Government Code Section 15618. The purpose of a property tax audit is to determine the accuracy, completeness, and reliability of the financial data furnished by state assessees and used by the board in the valuation process. Audits also include an internal review of the methods, calculations, and assumptions used by the State Assessed Properties Division staff. Before you today for your consideration are 3 property tax audits completed by State Assessed Property Division staff. The assessees have been presented with a copy of the audit report and provided an opportunity to provide additional information in response to the audit report and findings. I am available to answer any questions if needed, and I ask for your adoption of these 3 audits. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Colleagues, do we have any questions?
Just if I could make just a comment.
Please, go ahead.
So it's my understanding that there's been coordination with these 3 entities and the Board of Equalization in terms of coming to the accurate audits on each of them.
That is correct, Member Gaines. In each instance, when we've completed an audit, we transmit the full audit report and findings to the assessee. They are provided a 30-day window if they wish to challenge any of the audit findings or provide additional information. I am not aware of any outstanding objections or issues related to any of these 3 audits.
Wonderful. Thank you for working with them and letting them provide the information that was needed to get an accurate valuation.
Of course. Thank you.
Great. Okay, I see no other hands up. Let's go ahead and take public comment.
AT&T moderator, please let us know if there is anyone on the line who would like to make a public comment regarding this matter.
And once again, for a public comment, please press 10 at this time. Well, we have no public comments in queue. Please continue.
All right, thank you. Question, I'd like to entertain a motion to accept the staff's recommendation on item F1, the property tax audit. There's
So moved.
Thank you. Could we get a roll call vote, Ms. Taylor?
Certainly. Chair Cohen made a motion to accept the staff findings for the audit with Member Gaines seconding. Chair Cohen.
Aye.
Vice Chair Schaefer.
Aye.
Member Gaines.
Aye.
Member Vasquez.
Aye.
Deputy Controller Stowers not participating. The motion passes.
Great, thank you very much. Please call F2.
The next item is F2, Other Tax Program Non-Appearance Matters, Land Escape Assessment. Mr. McCool will present 8 items for your consideration, which may be voted on individually or collectively. Contribution disclosure forms are not required for these items. As these matters are a constitutional function, Ms. Stowers is not participating in accordance with Government Code Section 7.9. The land escaped assessments are A, Pacific Gas and Electric Company 0135, B, Southern California Edison 0148, C, BNSF Railway 0804, D, Los Angeles SMSA Limited Partnership DBA Verizon Wireless 2532. C. Fresno MSA Limited Partnership DBA Verizon Wireless 2552. F. Cellco Partnership DBA Verizon Wireless 2559. G. Sprint Spectrum LP 2720. H. Race Telecommunications Incorporated 8099. Mr. McCool?
Let me be the first to say good afternoon, Chair Cohen and honorable members of the board. Once again, Jack McCool, Chief of the State Assessed Properties Division. I'm here this afternoon to present 8 escaped assessments for the board's consideration. These items represent property that the assessees failed to report timely and as a result escaped assessment. All 8 assessees have been notified of the escaped assessments and have been given an opportunity to provide additional information to change our escaped assessment findings. I am available should you have any questions, and I ask for the board's adoption of these escaped assessments. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Mr. Gaines, I see your hand. You can go first.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify when we had discussed this earlier, when I discussed this earlier with you, Mr. McCool, I just wanted to clarify that in some of these cases, these are smaller entities, is what I think you had explained, and maybe they were perhaps not aware of the particular deadline. And in other cases, they're much larger entities and just trying to get a handle on all of their different properties that they own. It's almost by nature that some of them are going to get missed. But they've all been given adequate warning and knew what the deadlines are, or should have known that. Hopefully I'm describing that accurately.
I believe you are. Yes, you are correct.
Yeah. Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Okay, I see no other hands. Let's go to public comment and then I'll entertain a motion.
Ms. Cohen, we're having a difficulty with the closed captioner. So we might need to take a pause a moment here. I'm trying to gather more information.
Chair Cohen, members, would you like a 5-minute break?
Sure. Great, we'll reconvene at 11 minutes after 12.
Thank you, members. Thank you, staff.